My name is Jessica, and I'm 31 years old. I never thought I would spend Thanksgiving alone in my apartment stirring cranberry sauce while fighting back tears. After Mom died when I was 8, Dad became my world. We were inseparable until he met Diane. Last Thanksgiving, standing in their dining room, my father looked me in the eyes and said words that shattered my heart. "You're not family anymore. These are my real family now." 14 months later, he's at my door begging for forgiveness. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this resonates with you, please hit subscribe and join me on this journey. I grew up as a daddy's girl in every sense of the phrase. After my mother died from breast cancer when I was 8, it was just Dad and me against the world. He worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, and somehow he managed to juggle his career while raising me alone. He never missed a dance recital, parent-teacher conference, or movie night. Even when money was tight, he made sure I never felt the absence of anything except my mom. Our Friday night pizza and board game tradition remained unbroken throughout my childhood. We had inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. He taught me to change a tire, to balance a checkbook, and to stand up for myself when classmates were cruel. When I had my first heartbreak at 16, he sat on the edge of my bed, awkwardly holding a pint of chocolate ice cream, and let me cry until my eyes were swollen. I worked hard through college, getting a partial scholarship and working part-time to help with expenses. Dad insisted on contributing what he could, saying his only job was to set me up for success in life. I graduated with a degree in marketing and landed an entry-level position at a digital marketing agency. By 25, I had worked my way up to marketing executive specializing in campaign development. Dad was at my first office party, beaming with pride and telling anyone who would listen that I got my brains from my mother and my determination from him. Things began to change 2 years ago. Dad called me one evening sounding more animated than I had heard him in years. He had met someone at work, Diane, a new client relations manager who had transferred from the company's West Coast office. At 46, she was divorced with 2 teenagers, a 17-year-old son named Jordan and a 15-year-old daughter named Amelia. Their romance moved at whirlwind speed. Dad had dated occasionally since Mom died, but nothing serious. With Diane, he transformed. He started dressing differently, traded his beloved old sedan for a sleek SUV, and even began using phrases that didn't sound like him at all. When I mentioned these changes during our increasingly rare lunches, he would laugh it off, saying, "People evolve, Jess. You can't expect me to stay the same forever." 6 months after they met, Dad called to tell me they were getting married. I was shocked at the speed but tried to be supportive. "Are you happy, Dad?" I asked. When he said yes with more conviction than I had heard in his voice in years, I pushed aside my reservations. The first time I met Diane and her children was at an uncomfortable dinner, where Diane dominated the conversation, talking about the wedding plans and how they would blend their families. Jordan spent the entire meal texting under the table, while Amelia gave me assessing looks and one-word answers when I tried to engage her. Dad seemed oblivious to the tension, laughing too loudly at Diane's jokes and repeatedly saying how lucky he was to have found his second chance at a complete family. That phrase stung, though I tried not to show it. Hadn't we been a complete family all these years, just the 2 of us? After the wedding, Dad moved into Diane's larger house in the suburbs. I noticed he started calling less frequently. When I would call him, Diane often answered, saying he was busy helping Jordan with college applications or taking Amelia shopping. The few times we managed to meet for coffee, Dad spent most of the time talking about his new role as a stepfather and how fulfilling it was to be needed again. "You're all grown up now with your own successful life," he said once, stirring his coffee absently. "They're still finding their way. They need guidance, especially with their dad barely in the picture." I nodded and smiled, but inside I wondered when I had stopped needing my father. The truth was, I still needed him very much, just in different ways than when I was a child. As weeks turned to months, I watched my once devoted father transform into someone obsessed with proving himself as the perfect husband and stepfather. He volunteered to coach Jordan's recreational basketball league, despite knowing little about the sport. He spent hours helping Amelia practice for her driver's test. Meanwhile, our weekly phone calls dwindled to monthly, then to occasional texts. Each time I expressed that I missed our time together, Dad would promise to make plans soon, but those plans rarely materialized. I began to feel like I was being gradually erased from his life, replaced by his new ready-made family, a family that seemed increasingly reluctant to make space for me. The first real crack in my heart appeared on my 30th birthday. Dad and I had always celebrated with dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, just the two of us. It was our tradition. That year, I made reservations weeks in advance and reminded Dad several times. He assured me he wouldn't miss it. 2 hours before dinner, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice strained. "Sweetheart, I am so sorry, but I need to reschedule. Amelia has a last-minute audition for the school play and she's so nervous. Diane asked if I could be there for support." I sat on my bed, birthday dress half-zipped, and felt my throat tighten. "The audition is at 8 at night. They're doing evening auditions because the drama teacher works another job. I know it's terrible timing, Jess. We can do your birthday dinner tomorrow instead." I swallowed my disappointment. "Sure, Dad. That's fine. Good luck to Amelia." The rescheduled dinner never happened. First, Jordan had a college interview Dad needed to drive him to. Then Diane wasn't feeling well and needed Dad at home. Each excuse seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. 2 weeks later, I finally gave up on the birthday celebration and suggested a quick lunch near his office instead. He agreed, sounding relieved at the simplicity of the plan. When we met, he slid a gift card across the table with an apologetic smile. "I know this doesn't make up for missing your birthday," he said. I stared at the generic coffee shop gift card, not even from my favorite coffee place, but from the chain near his office, and felt a heaviness in my chest. This man, who once spent weeks secretly planning my surprise 16th birthday party, had now reduced my 30th to an afterthought. "Thanks, Dad," I said, tucking the card into my purse. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the amount on the card was less than we used to spend on our birthday dinners together. The next disappointment came when Diane invited me to their house for dinner. I arrived with a bottle of wine and homemade dessert, hoping this might be a turning point. Instead, I spent the evening watching Diane critique my career choices while Dad nodded along. "Marketing is so unstable these days," she said, swirling her wine. "My friend's daughter was in marketing and got laid off twice in 1 year. Have you considered something more secure like healthcare administration? That's what I suggested to Jordan." Dad, who had once proudly introduced me as "my daughter, the marketing genius," to everyone we met, now sat silently, as Diane implied my career was a poor choice. Meanwhile, Jordan and Amelia made little effort to hide their disinterest in my presence. Jordan answered texts throughout dinner, while Amelia rolled her eyes whenever I spoke. When I asked about their interests, hoping to find common ground, their answers were clipped and dismissive. After dinner, I offered to help with dishes and overheard Diane in the living room with Dad. "She's just so intense, Richard," she was saying. "Always trying to dominate the conversation and bring things back to herself. The kids find it exhausting." I stood, frozen plates in hand, waiting for my father to defend me. Instead, I heard him sigh. "Jessica can be a bit much sometimes," he agreed. "She's always been that way. I'll talk to her about trying harder with the kids." Later that night, Dad pulled me aside before I left. "Diane thinks you might be trying too hard with Jordan and Amelia," he said carefully. "They're at difficult ages. Maybe give them some space instead of asking so many questions." I stared at him, unable to comprehend how my attempts at friendly conversation had been twisted into something intrusive. "I was just trying to get to know them, Dad." "I know, sweetheart. But they're still adjusting to everything. Just follow their lead next time, okay?" I nodded numbly and drove home fighting tears, wondering when my father had started seeing me through someone else's critical eyes. The final straw before Thanksgiving came when my apartment flooded due to a burst pipe upstairs. I called Dad in tears, water soaking my belongings, not knowing what to do. He promised to come right away to help. 3 hours later, as I sat among soaking wet furniture and ruined books, he called to say he couldn't make it after all. "Amelia's having a panic attack about her math test tomorrow," he explained. "I can't leave her like this. You understand, right?" I didn't understand. Not really. but my friend Sarah came instead, helping me move salvageable items and finding me a temporary place to stay. When she asked where my dad was, I made excuses for him, but Sarah's expression told me she wasn't convinced. "Jess," she said gently, "you always do this. You always make excuses for him. But ever since he married Diane, he's been treating you like an afterthought." "He's just excited about his new family," I said automatically, the defense feeling hollow even to my own ears. Sarah shook her head but didn't push further. Despite these disappointments, when Dad called about Thanksgiving, I eagerly accepted the invitation. He asked if I could contribute to the meal, which turned out to mean bringing most of the traditional dishes: turkey stuffing, mashed potatoes, and 2 pies, despite living an hour away with no help to transport everything. "Diane's family is more into non-traditional food," Dad explained. But I told her how much the classics mean to us. The word "us" gave me hope. Perhaps this Thanksgiving would be the turning point, a chance for us all to finally become a real blended family. I agreed to bring everything he asked for, already planning how I would manage to transport a feast across town by myself. I spent 3 days preparing for Thanksgiving. I brined the turkey for 24 hours, using the recipe Mom had passed down to Dad, who had shared it with me. I baked pumpkin and pecan pies from scratch, remembering how Dad and I used to rate each slice on a scale of 1 to 10 when I was a kid. I made cranberry sauce with orange zest the way he liked it, and stuffing with extra sage because that was our tradition. As I cooked, I reminisced about Thanksgivings past, just Dad and me. After Mom died, sometimes joined by an elderly neighbor or a coworker of Dad's who had nowhere else to go. We'd watch the parade together in the morning, then football while the turkey cooked. Simple celebrations that never felt lacking despite our small numbers. On Thanksgiving morning, I carefully packed every dish into insulated carriers I'd borrowed from work, then Tetrised them into my car. The drive to Diane's house was nerve-wracking, every sharp turn threatening to topple my precarious arrangement of food containers. When I arrived, sweating despite the November chill, Diane opened the door with a phone cradled between her ear and shoulder. She gestured me in without interrupting her conversation, pointing vaguely toward the kitchen. I made 3 trips from my car, arms straining with heavy dishes, before Dad emerged from the family room. "There's my girl," he said, giving me a quick side hug before returning his attention to the football game blaring from the large TV. Jordan was sprawled on the sofa, while Amelia sat curled in an armchair, both engrossed in their phones. I stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," Jordan grunted without looking up. Amelia gave a brief wave, eyes never leaving her screen. Dad settled back into his recliner, already refocused on the game. I retreated to the kitchen where Diane had finished her call and was inspecting my contributions. "The turkey looks a bit dry," she remarked, lifting the foil on my carefully prepared bird. "And we actually don't need this cranberry sauce. I bought some yesterday, the kind with whole berries that Jordan likes." She moved my homemade sauce to the back of the refrigerator and placed a store-bought jar prominently on the counter. Then she rearranged the appetizer platter I'd assembled, removing several items and replacing them with her own selections. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Much more balanced presentation." I bit my tongue and offered to help set the table. Diane directed me to the dining room where I found place cards already arranged. My name was at the far end of the table, separated from Dad by Diane's sister and brother-in-law, whom I'd never met. Dad was positioned at the head with Diane at the other end, Jordan and Amelia flanking him. As I stood looking at this visual representation of my position in the family hierarchy, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Diane's extended family, her sister and brother-in-law, their 2 children, and Diane's elderly parents. They swept in with loud greetings and inside jokes, barely glancing at me when Diane introduced us. Dad moved among them with surprising ease, laughing at their references to past gatherings I'd never attended, and accepting their welcoming hugs as though he'd been part of their family for years rather than months. "And where are your people, Richard?" Diane's father asked as they settled in the living room with pre-dinner drinks. "Right here," Dad said, putting his arm around Diane and gesturing to Jordan and Amelia. After a pause so slight I almost missed it, he added, "And Jessica, of course," nodding in my direction as an afterthought. When dinner was finally served, the seating arrangement isolated me among virtual strangers. Diane's sister talked across me to her husband while her teenage children whispered and giggled together. I picked at my food, the turkey I'd so carefully prepared now seeming tasteless. From my position, I could see Dad at the head of the table beaming as he carved more turkey for Amelia. Diane's father was telling a story that had everyone laughing, though I couldn't hear the punchline from my distant seat. When there was a lull in conversation, I spoke up. Dad, remember how we used to go around the table and say what we're thankful for? It was a tradition we'd maintained even in the years when it was just the two of us. Before Dad could answer, Diane interjected. We actually do gratitude journals in this house. It's more meaningful to reflect privately than to put people on the spot. Oh, I said, feeling my face flush. That sounds nice too. Dad nodded in agreement. Diane introduced us to journaling. It's very therapeutic, isn't it, Jordan? Jordan, mouthful of mashed potatoes, gave a non-committal shrug. Jessica's turkey is quite dry, remarked Diane's mother loudly. Not enough butter, I expect. I followed Mom's recipe, I said quietly, looking to Dad for support. Well, traditions can be improved upon, Diane said briskly. Next year we might try something different altogether. Jordan's been asking for prime rib instead of turkey. Next year. The casual way she dismissed both my contribution and my family traditions stung, but it was the assumption that this uncomfortable gathering would be repeated that truly hurt. The conversation moved on, flowing around me like I was a rock in a stream. I sat silently until Jordan made a comment about real family while reaching for the store-bought cranberry sauce. Dad said your sauce was always super sweet anyway, he remarked, glancing my way. This one's better. Something in me snapped. Dad used to love my cranberry sauce. He taught me how to make it when I was 10. An awkward silence fell over the table. Dad cleared his throat. People's tastes change, Jess. The whole berry kind is nice for a change. A change from 20 years of tradition? I asked, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. You're making too big a deal of this, Diane said dismissively. It's just cranberry sauce. It's not just cranberry sauce, I replied. It's about acknowledging what came before. I understand embracing new traditions, but it feels like everything from before is being erased, including me. Jordan snorted. Dramatic much. Not everything is about you. Jordan, Diane said in a warning tone that lacked any real disapproval. I looked directly at my father. Dad, you haven't called me in weeks. You missed my birthday dinner for a school audition. You didn't come when my apartment flooded, and now I'm sitting at the far end of the Thanksgiving table like a distant acquaintance while you act like your life began the day you met Diane. Dad's face flushed. That's unfair, Jessica. I'm trying to balance a lot right now. Balance, I echoed. When was the last time we had lunch, just the two of us? When was the last time you asked about my promotion or my life at all? You're a grown woman, he said, his voice rising. Jordan and Amelia are still kids who need guidance. They're teenagers, not toddlers, I countered. And being an adult doesn't mean I stopped needing my father. Diane put her hand on Dad's arm. Richard, you don't have to justify yourself. Jessica clearly doesn't understand what it means to be part of a blended family. She's only thinking of herself. Dad looked at Diane, then at Jordan and Amelia, who were watching the exchange with undisguised interest, and finally back at me. Something hardened in his expression. I have responsibilities now, Jessica. Real family responsibilities. The emphasis he placed on real hit me like a physical blow. What were the last 23 years then? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Wasn't I real family? Dad stood up, his napkin falling to the floor. You're an adult with your own life. They're still forming theirs. I can't keep prioritizing your neediness when I have two children who actually need me. The room went silent. Even Diane looked surprised at his outburst. Dad, I said, my voice breaking, what are you saying? He looked at me with eyes I no longer recognized. I'm saying it's time you stopped expecting me to be at your beck and call. This is my family now. He gestured to Diane and her children. These people need me. You want me. There's a difference. I felt tears threatening but forced them back. "I've never been at your beck and call. I just wanted to remain a part of your life." "Well, maybe that's the problem," he said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Maybe it's time we both faced facts. You're not family anymore. These are my real family now." Silence fell like a physical weight. Diane's relatives looked down at their plates. Jordan smirked slightly. Amelia at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I stood up slowly, legs trembling. "Thank you for making that so clear," I said, proud that my voice didn't break. "Enjoy your real family Thanksgiving." I walked out without taking my coat or any of the food containers I'd brought. The drive home passed in a blur of shock and tears. By the time I reached my apartment, my father, the man who had been my world since I was 8 years old, had not called to apologize or even to check if I'd made it home safely. I sat in my parked car for a long time, too numb to move, wondering how the person who had promised to always be there for me could so completely erase me from his heart. The week after Thanksgiving passed in a fog of grief. I called in sick to work something I'd never done without legitimate illness. My boss, understanding the situation, vaguely approved a full week off. I spent most of those days in bed, alternating between crying and staring blankly at the ceiling. Sarah came over daily, bringing food I couldn't eat and sitting with me in compassionate silence. Other friends texted and called, but I let most go to voicemail. The pain of my father's rejection was so acute that normal interaction seemed impossible. "He'll call," Sarah assured me on day 3 of my self-imposed isolation. "He'll realize what he said and he'll apologize." But my phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, not even an email from the man who had once checked on me multiple times during a simple head cold. After a week, I forced myself to return to work. Focusing on marketing campaigns and client presentations provided brief reprieves from my personal heartache. I found myself staying late at the office, preferring work to my empty apartment, where memories of Dad helping me move in and hanging pictures haunted every room. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I finally gathered my courage and called him. Diane answered. "Jessica," she said, her tone cool and formal. "I'm afraid your father is very busy with Jordan's college applications right now. This isn't a good time. Could you ask him to call me back when he has a moment?" I asked, hating the pleading note in my voice. There was a pause. "Jessica, I think it's best if you give your father some space right now. He's very upset about your behavior at Thanksgiving." "My behavior," I repeated incredulously. "He told me I wasn't his family anymore." "You pushed him to that point with your demands and jealousy," Diane replied. "Richard is finally happy with a complete family unit, and your constant neediness is making him feel guilty. If you really love your father, you'll respect his need for distance right now." The call ended with me staring at my phone in disbelief. Not only was I being denied contact with my father, but somehow I had been cast as the villain in this scenario. That evening, I found a therapist specializing in family estrangement and booked an appointment for the following week. If I couldn't fix my relationship with my father, I at least needed to find a way to live with the broken pieces of my heart. Dr. Lynn, a compassionate woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes, listened to my story without judgment. "Parental rejection is one of the most painful experiences a person can endure," she said. "But it says more about your father and his current situation than it does about your worth." Those weekly sessions became my anchor as the holiday season progressed. Thanksgiving had been difficult enough, but as Christmas approached, the absence of my only blood relative became even more pronounced. I declined invitations to visit friends' families, unwilling to be the pitied extra at someone else's celebration. Instead, I accepted Sarah's invitation to a friends-only Christmas dinner. 6 of us, all without family plans for various reasons, gathered at her apartment on Christmas Eve with potluck dishes and secret Santa gifts. It wasn't the Christmas I had expected, but as we laughed and shared stories late into the night, I felt a tiny seed of healing take root. These people had chosen to include me in their holiday. No obligation, no history, just genuine desire for my company. My father didn't call on Christmas. I had sent him a card and a simple gift, a leather bookmark embossed with his initials, but received nothing in return. The silence was answer enough. As the new year approached, I made resolutions focused on rebuilding my sense of self. I joined a support group for adult children estranged from parents, finding solace in the stories of others who understood my particular pain. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with and strengthened bonds with those who had stood by me through the past difficult months. Work became another source of healing. I threw myself into projects with new intensity, finding that my emotional experience had somehow deepened my understanding of human motivation, a surprisingly valuable skill in marketing. My boss noticed assigning me to key accounts and including me in high-level strategy meetings. By my 31st birthday in February, I had developed new routines and relationships to fill the dad-shaped hole in my life. Sarah organized a surprise party at my favorite restaurant, the one where Dad and I had always celebrated reclaiming the space with new memories. As winter turned to spring, I began keeping a journal chronicling my grief, but also my growth. Some days the entries were tear-stained and brief. Miss him today. Why wasn't I enough? Other days I could acknowledge progress, presented to the board without thinking about Dad's approval once. My accomplishments belonged to me. Summer brought a vacation with 3 close friends to a beach house on the coast. For 1 week, I didn't think about family drama or check my phone hoping for a message that never came. We swam, built bonfires, drank wine under the stars, and laughed until our sides hurt. In those moments, I remembered what it felt like to be simply and uncomplicatedly happy. My breakthrough in therapy came in late August, nearly 9 months after the Thanksgiving disaster. Dr. Lin had asked me to write a letter to my father not to send, but to express my unfiltered feelings. "You were my hero," I wrote. "You were everything to me. How could you throw me away for people who've known you less than 2 years? Was I just a responsibility you were relieved to shed? Was I ever truly loved for myself, or was I just Mom's legacy that you felt obligated to maintain?" As I read the letter aloud in our session, something shifted inside me. I've been seeking his approval my entire life, I realized. Even now, after everything, I'm still trying to be good enough for him to want me again. "And what would happen if you stopped seeking his approval?" Dr. Lin asked gently. The question stunned me with its simplicity and its power. "I'd just be me, living for myself." Is that such a terrible prospect? It wasn't. In fact, the idea felt like removing a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. I didn't need to earn my father's love or anyone's love to have value. My worth wasn't determined by whether someone chose to keep me in their life. As fall approached again, bringing with it the anniversary of the estrangement, I felt stronger, but still carried an underlying sadness. I renovated my apartment, painting the walls colors my father would have called impractical, buying furniture that suited my taste rather than what was most sensible. Small acts of self-determination that helped me reclaim my space and identity. I began planning a Friendsgiving celebration, inviting the people who had become my chosen family over the past year. I bought new serving dishes, symbolically replacing those I'd left behind at Diane's house. This Thanksgiving would be different, filled with genuine connection, rather than strained obligation. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, as I was finishing a client presentation at work, my assistant poked her head into the conference room. "Jessica, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your father." The room tilted slightly as I gathered my materials with shaking hands. I hadn't seen or spoken to my father in nearly a year. What could he possibly want now? In the lobby stood a man I almost didn't recognize. My father had aged years in months. His hair had more gray, his posture was stooped, and his eyes held a haunted quality I'd never seen before. "Jessica," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I know I have no right to show up like this." Colleagues walked past, glancing curiously at us. I maintained my professional composure with effort. "This isn't a good time or place, Dad." I know, he said quickly. "Could we maybe get coffee after you finish work? Please, Jess, just 30 minutes. I should have said no. Every self-help book on boundaries would have advised against it. But despite everything, this man was still my father. 5:30 at the cafe around the corner, I said. I can give you half an hour. The rest of my workday passed in a distracted blur. At 5:25, I found myself sitting in the cafe watching the door with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Dad arrived precisely on time, punctuality being one trait he'd never compromised. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around his coffee mug, as if seeking warmth despite the mild temperature. Up close, he looked even worse, skin's sallow new lines around his eyes, the confident man I'd known replaced by someone diminished and uncertain. "Thank you for meeting me," he began. "I wouldn't blame you if you'd refused." I said nothing, waiting for whatever had brought him here. "Things have fallen apart, Jess," he continued, voice low. "Diane and I separated 3 weeks ago. I'm staying in a furnished apartment near work until I figure things out." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, vindication, concern, and wariness. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said neutrally. "Don't be," he replied with unexpected bitterness. "It was all a mirage. The perfect family I thought I'd found." He trailed off, staring into his coffee. "Jordan dropped out of college after 1 semester, used the tuition money I paid to buy a car, then totaled it driving drunk. Diane expected me to pay for another car, another semester without consequences." He looked up at me. "Amelia was caught shoplifting 3 times. Designer clothes jewelry. Diane called it typical teenage rebellion and got angry when I suggested therapy." "That sounds difficult," I said carefully. "It got worse and worse. The kids became more demanding, more disrespectful. Diane turned out to be controlling in ways I hadn't seen during our whirlwind romance. Everything was always my fault. I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't giving enough." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. "I woke up one morning and realized I didn't recognize myself anymore," he continued. "I'd given up everything, my home, my interests, my relationship with you, to be part of a family that saw me as an ATM and emotional punching bag." He reached across the table, though he stopped short of touching my hand. "Jessica, I am so deeply ashamed of how I treated you. What I said at Thanksgiving, it's unforgivable. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I realize what I did, and I'm sorry beyond words." Tears filled his eyes. "You were never just a responsibility to me. You were the best part of my life, and I threw that away because I was having a midlife crisis, or something equally pathetic. I convinced myself I needed a normal family with a wife and multiple children, as if what you and I had wasn't perfect exactly as it was." I sat perfectly still, afraid that if I moved or spoke, I would either break down in tears or walk out. Neither seemed like the right response. "Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks," he said, wiping his eyes with a napkin. "I know you probably have plans, but I wondered if maybe we could have dinner together, just the two of us, like old times." The request stunned me with its audacity. After a year of silence, he expected to slide back into my life as if nothing had happened. "No," I said firmly. "That's not going to happen." His face fell, but he nodded. "I understand." "I don't think you do," I continued. "I'm hosting Friendsgiving this year, people who have been there for me during the worst year of my life, people who didn't discard me when something shinier came along." "Jessica." "I'm not finished," I said, surprised by my own steadiness. "You can't just appear after a year of silence and expect to pick up where we left off. That relationship is gone. You destroyed it." "I know," he whispered. "I know I did." I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. "I have to go." "Jess, please," he said desperately. "Tell me what I can do. I'll do anything." Looking at his anguished face, I felt no triumph, only sadness for what had been lost. "I don't know if there's anything you can do. I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I've had to learn to live without you." "I'm moving out of Diane's house permanently this weekend," he said quickly, as if afraid I would leave before he could finish. "I've realized you were my only true family all along. Everyone else was just temporary." The painful irony of his words, reflecting exactly what he'd said to me a year ago, only reversed, wasn't lost on either of us. "I need to go," I repeated, standing up. "This is a lot to process." "Can I call you?" he asked, rising as well. "Please, Jess. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway. I hesitated, then took out my business card and wrote my personal number on the back. I'm not promising anything, I said, handing it to him. But yes, you can call. I may not always answer. His hand trembled as he took the card. Thank you, he said fervently. Thank you, Jessica. I walked away without looking back, emotions churning. Part of me wanted to run back and embrace the father I had missed so desperately. Another part wanted to tell him to never contact me again. But the largest part, the part that had been healing slowly over the past year, knew that neither extreme was the answer. Over the following days, Dad called every evening. Sometimes I answered briefly, other times I let it go to voicemail. He began leaving small gifts at my door, a book I had mentioned wanting to read months ago. Flowers once, even a tin of the special hot chocolate we used to drink together on snow days when I was young. Each gesture reopened the wound slightly, while also applying a new layer of healing. I discussed everything with Dr. Lynn, who encouraged me to maintain boundaries while allowing myself to consider what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with my father moving forward. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the way things were, she reminded me. It means freeing yourself from the burden of anger which doesn't require reconciliation. Sarah was more blunt in her assessment. He burned the bridge, Jess. It's up to you whether you want to rebuild it, but if you do, make sure it's on your terms this time. One evening, a week before Thanksgiving, I received a letter, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on heavy stationery. Dad had poured out 8 pages of regret, reflection, and raw emotion. He detailed his failings without excuse, acknowledged the pain he had caused, and expressed his wish to earn back some small place in my life without expectation or demands. The letter ended, "I will love you unconditionally for the rest of my life, whether or not you choose to have me in yours. You are and have always been my true north." I read the letter 3 times, then called him. "Lunch tomorrow," I said when he answered. "We need to talk in person." We met at a small bistro halfway between our workplaces. I arrived first and selected a table in the corner that offered privacy without feeling isolated. I had spent the previous evening with my therapist preparing for this conversation, identifying my boundaries and practicing how to express them clearly. When Dad arrived, he was carrying a leather-bound photo album I recognized from my childhood. I shook my head as he began to open it. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want to look at old pictures right now." He closed the album immediately. "I'm sorry. I know what you thought," I replied. "You thought reminding me of happy memories would make it easier for me to forgive and forget. But those memories are exactly why this hurts so much, Dad. Because the person in those photos with me wouldn't have done what you did." He flinched but nodded. "You're right." The server took our orders, and when we were alone again, I took a deep breath and began the speech I had rehearsed. "I want to be very clear about something," I said. "What you said and did last Thanksgiving was not a momentary lapse or a simple mistake. It was the culmination of months of you gradually pushing me out of your life and prioritizing your new family." Dad started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Please let me finish. This is difficult enough." He nodded, closing his mouth. "You broke my heart," I continued. "Not just that day, but in all the little rejections leading up to it. The missed birthday, the flood you couldn't help with. The way you let Diane and her children treat me with disrespect. The way you began seeing me through their eyes instead of your own." My voice remained steady, though emotion threatened to overwhelm me. "When you said I wasn't family anymore, it wasn't just cruel words spoken in anger. It was you confirming what your actions had been showing for months, that I was disposable to you, that what we had built over 23 years meant less than what you'd created in less than 2. Dad's eyes filled with tears, but I pressed on. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? To be rejected so completely by the one person who was supposed to love me unconditionally, the person who promised Mom on her deathbed that he would always be there for me." "Jessica, I'm still not finished," I said. For months I questioned my worth as a person. I wondered what was so fundamentally unlovable about me that my own father could discard me so easily. I had nightmares. I lost weight. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I can count. Dad wiped his eyes, his lunch untouched. Now you're back because your perfect new family turned out to be not so perfect after all. And part of me wonders if you would have ever recognized how badly you hurt me if things had worked out with Diane. He started to protest, but something in my expression stopped him. Here's what I need you to understand, I continued. I am not a backup plan. I am not someone you can push aside when convenient and pull back when needed. I am a whole person with feelings and dignity. The server returned with our food, creating an awkward pause in the conversation. When we were alone again, Dad finally spoke. Everything you've said is right. He admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I have no excuses. None. What I did was unforgivable. Then why should I forgive you? I asked directly. He seemed taken aback by the question. I don't know that you should. I want you to selfishly because I miss you terribly and regret my actions more than I can express. But I don't know that I deserve forgiveness. His honesty surprised me. I had expected defensiveness or more excuses. The truth is, he continued, I got caught up in some fantasy of having a second chance at a normal family. I convinced myself that because you were an adult with your own successful life, you didn't need me anymore so I could focus on being needed by Diane's kids. It was, God, it sounds so pathetic saying it out loud. It was a massive self-deception. He pushed his plate away, food untouched. I told myself I was doing the right thing being a father figure to these teenagers who didn't have one. But really, I was running away from the emptiness I felt after you grew up. Instead of finding healthy ways to adjust to our changing relationship, I replaced you. The brutal honesty of his assessment took me by surprise. This wasn't the defensive man from Thanksgiving who had blamed me for being needy. When did you realize all this? I asked. It's been a slow, painful awakening, he admitted. At first, I justified everything. You were being difficult. You weren't trying hard enough with Diane and the kids. You were jealous of my new happiness. He shook his head in self-disgust. But as things got worse with them, I started seeing more clearly. Jordan and Amelia never respected me, they just wanted what I could give them. Diane became increasingly controlling, monitoring my calls, my spending, even what I wore. He looked directly at me. But the real wake-up call was when Diane's brother mentioned something about you, something critical, and I found myself defending you automatically. And then I realized I hadn't defended you when it actually mattered. I had let them all belittle and exclude you right in front of me. I took a sip of water, processing his words. Jessica, I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any chance we could try to rebuild some kind of relationship? Not picking up where we left off, I know that's impossible, but something new on your terms. The question hung between us. A year ago, I would have said yes immediately, grateful for any crumb of his attention. Now I considered carefully what I wanted and needed. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm not ready to trust you again. Trust has to be earned, and you shattered it completely. He nodded, accepting this truth. If, and this is a big, if we were to try rebuilding a relationship, it would need to be completely different. I continued. I would need to see consistent effort and respect for my boundaries. I would need acknowledgement of the pain you caused without defensive excuses. And I would need time, lots of time. I understand, he said quietly. Do you? I pressed. Because rebuilding trust isn't about grand gestures or emotional conversations. It's about small, consistent actions over time that prove your words are trustworthy. Tell me what those actions would look like, he said. I want to understand exactly what you need. I considered this carefully. Regular communication that you initiate, not just responding when I reach out. Following through on commitments no matter how small. Respecting my no without pushing. Not making promises you can't keep. He nodded, taking mental notes. And I need you to understand that I may never feel the same way about you again, I added. The daughter who thought you hung the moon is gone. I've had to become someone stronger and more self-reliant because you weren't there when I needed you. This truth seemed to hit him hardest. He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the impact of my words. I understand, he said finally. And I would be grateful for any relationship you're willing to have with me, even if it's different from before. We spent the remainder of lunch discussing practical next steps. He could call twice a week. We might meet for coffee occasionally. There would be no holiday gatherings yet. That wound was still too fresh. As we prepared to leave, he asked timidly, "Would it be all right if I called you on Thanksgiving? Not to intrude on your plans, just to wish you a good day?" I thought about my Friendsgiving preparations and the chosen family who would gather at my table. Yes, I decided. You can call in the morning before everyone arrives. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for even considering giving me another chance. I stood to leave, gathering my purse. I'm not doing this for you, I said clearly. I'm doing it for me, because carrying anger hurts me more than it hurts you. But understand this, I will walk away permanently if you ever treat me like an afterthought again. I understand, he said solemnly. I won't make that mistake again. As I walked back to my office, I called Sarah. I did it, I told her. I said everything I needed to say. And how do you feel? She asked. I considered the question carefully. Stronger, I finally answered. Like I'm in control of my own story now. For the first time in a year, I felt like I was walking towards something rather than away from something. The path ahead wasn't clear, but I was choosing it deliberately with open eyes and firm boundaries. Whatever relationship my father and I might rebuild would be on my terms, shaped by mutual respect rather than obligation or fear of abandonment. I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that Thanksgiving dinner in tears. That Jessica had been shattered by rejection. This Jessica had rebuilt herself stronger at the broken places. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and crisp. 1 year exactly since my father had broken my heart with 5 devastating words. I woke early, the scent of pumpkin and cinnamon filling my apartment from the pies I'd baked the night before. My table was already set with mismatched plates and glasses that somehow worked together beautifully, much like the assortment of friends who would gather around it later. At 9:30, my phone rang. Dad, right on time as promised. Happy Thanksgiving, Jessica, he said, his voice warm but careful, aware of the day's painful anniversary. Happy Thanksgiving, I replied, continuing to chop vegetables for the stuffing. I won't keep you, he said. I just wanted to say I'm thinking of you today and hoping your celebration is wonderful. Thank you, I said, appreciating his respect for my boundaries. What are your plans? A colleague invited me to join their family, he replied. That's where I'm heading in an hour or so. There was an awkward pause, the weight of last year's disaster hanging between us. Jessica, he said finally, I know today might bring back painful memories. I just want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret what I said and did. If I could take it back. I know, I interrupted gently, but we can't change the past. No, he agreed. We can only try to do better going forward. After we hung up, I continued my preparations with a sense of calm purpose. Over the past 3 weeks since our lunch conversation, Dad had been keeping his word. He called regularly, but didn't push for more than I was ready to give. Our interactions were sometimes awkward, sometimes strained, but consistently respectful. Whether we would ever fully rebuild our relationship remained uncertain. Trust, once shattered, is like a mosaic, repaired beautiful in its own way perhaps, but forever changed the cracks always visible if you know where to look. At 4 o'clock, my apartment filled with the warm buzz of conversation as friends arrived bearing side dishes and bottles of wine. Sarah was first helping me with last-minute preparations. Then came coworkers who had become friends, neighbors from my building, and members of my support group who had nowhere else to go. Looking around at these faces, some I'd known for years, others I'd met during the darkest period of my life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. These people had chosen to be here, chosen to be part of my life. No obligation of blood or history bound us together, only genuine caring and mutual respect. As we gathered around my table, I observed the contrast between this Thanksgiving and the last. No tension hummed beneath polite conversation. No one was made to feel unwelcome or lesser. The laughter was genuine, the connections real. When someone suggested we share what we were thankful for, I didn't hesitate. I'm thankful for chosen family, I said, raising my glass. For the people who stay when they could leave, who see you at your worst and still choose to see the best in you, who help you rebuild when everything falls apart. Murmurs of agreement circled the table as others shared their gratitude. Looking at these faces, open, kind, accepting, I realized how much I had gained even through my loss. The pain of my father's rejection had forced me to build something new, a community based on mutual care rather than obligation. Later, as we enjoyed dessert and coffee, my phone lit up with a text message. Dad, hope your Thanksgiving is filled with joy. Thank you for allowing me the chance to try to make amends. Enjoy your evening with your friends. The message was perfect in its restraint, acknowledging the day without demanding attention, expressing gratitude without seeking praise. A small step in rebuilding trust. I replied simply, "Thank you. Hope yours is good too." My therapist, Dr. Lin, had taught me that healing isn't about erasing pain, but integrating it into a larger narrative. The goal isn't to pretend the wound never happened, she'd explained. It's to understand how it changed you and find meaning in that change. Over the past year, I had learned painful but valuable lessons. I had discovered that self-worth cannot depend on another person's approval. That family can be chosen as well as born. That setting boundaries isn't selfish but necessary for healthy relationships. That forgiveness is a gift you give yourself more than the person who hurt you. Most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger than I knew. My father's rejection had broken my heart, but I had put the pieces back together in a new configuration, one that was more resilient, more authentic, and ultimately more open to genuine connection. As my friends lingered over dessert, sharing stories and making plans for holiday shopping the next day, I felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever happened with my father going forward, whether we rebuilt something meaningful or ultimately went separate ways, I knew I would be okay. I had created this warm circle of love and support. I had survived the worst pain I could imagine and emerged not just intact, but somehow more whole. The father who had once been my entire world now occupied a smaller, more realistic place in my life. And that was okay. I had room for so much more friends, more experiences, more joy, now that I wasn't defining myself solely as my father's daughter. When my last guest departed near midnight, I stood in my quiet apartment surveying the remnants of our celebration. Dishes needed washing, leftovers needed storing, but I felt no rush to tidy away the evidence of this healing gathering. A year ago, I had driven home from Thanksgiving in tears, feeling abandoned and worthless. Tonight, I stood in a space of my own creation, surrounded by the aftermath of love freely given and received. I picked up my phone and composed one more text to my father. Today was good. Coffee next week. His reply came almost instantly. Name the time and place. I'll be there. Small steps, careful rebuilding, no guarantees. But for the first time in a long time, the future felt open with possibility, rather than shrouded in pain. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship that seemed beyond repair? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join me for more real conversations about family healing and finding strength through difficult times. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope and recovery, please share this video with them. Thank you for being part of my journey, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful things are created from the pieces of what was broken. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.